Massachusetts was a heavyweight in early Republican U.S. history. Massachusetts had also played an outsized role in the fighting of the American Revolution, and her thinking carried weight. In January 1787, the scene of ratification shifted to Massachusetts.
In the proposed Constitution, the powers of the whole government are limited to certain national objects and are accurately defined. We must consider this subject with respect to the general structure of the Constitution. The Senate represents the sovereignty of the states. The House of Representatives the people of the United States. The former have a longer term in their office. It is then necessary that that body which represents the people should have a permanence in their office to resist any operations of the Senate which might be injurious to the people.
So what are the implications? The federal government's powers under this system are limited, and the limitations on federal powers were an important factor in the reasoning of those advocating ratification. To delegate powers and then have the recipient ignore the limits would be to invalidate the rationale behind the delegation.
Relinquishing a hair's breadth in a constitution is a great deal, for by small degrees has liberty, in all nations, been wrested from the hands of the people. I know great powers are necessary to be given to Congress, but I wish they may be well guarded.
So what does this mean? Many of us have heard the metaphor of the boiling frog, getting people to accept some bad situation by very gradually increasing the pain level. Here is an historical example of this kind of thinking. Turner is saying that the government will gradually take more and more power in a series of very small steps, and the end result will be the loss of liberty by the people. And in Turner's view, the people must guard against this.
In answer to an inquiry why a Bill of Rights was not annexed to this Constitution, Varnum said that, by the Constitution of Massachusetts, the legislature have a right to make all laws not repugnant to the Constitution. Now, said he, if there is such a clause in the Constitution under consideration, then there would be a necessity for a Bill of Rights. In the section under debate, Congress have an expressed power to levy taxes, etc., and to pass laws to carry their requisitions into execution. This, he said, was express and required no Bill of Rights. Varnum then showed the difference between delegated power and the grant of all power.
Here is more illustration of the difference between state constitutions and the federal constitution. According to Varnum, in the state constitution, everything that is not expressly forbidden is allowed to the state government. In this federal constitution, all the legitimate powers of the federal government were expressed, and the federal government could not act except in executing the expressed powers, so no reservation of rights was necessary. This way of thinking by the advocates of ratification was important in gaining the approval of their skeptical peers.
That it be explicitly declared that all powers not expressly delegated to Congress are reserved to the several states to be by them exercised. It removes a doubt which many have entertained respecting the matter, and gives assurance that, if any law made by the federal government shall be extended beyond the power granted by the proposed Constitution, and inconsistent with the Constitution of this state, it will be an error, and adjudged by the courts of law to be void.
Adams is recommending that Massachusetts declare explicitly in her ratification instrument that all powers not expressly delegated to Congress are reserved to the states, to get this on the record as the condition upon which Massachusetts ratified. He also argues that the courts will declare void any extension of federal powers beyond the delegated powers.
I have long considered the watchfulness of the people over the conduct of their rulers the strongest guard against the encroachments of power, and I hope the people of this country will always be thus watchful.
Adams also urged that people be watchful over the conduct of their rulers and that they watch against encroachments of power. Of course, what do people do if the federal government did encroach upon their powers and left to the imagination? It is difficult to imagine, however, that Adams was saying that the people should be watchful of their rulers, and yet when the rulers violate their trust, that the people would do nothing but just note that it had happened.
First, that it be explicitly declared that all powers not expressly delegated by the aforesaid Constitution are reserved to the several states, to be by them exercised.
In the end, Massachusetts did exactly as John Adams had recommended and included in her ratification instrument the statement that all power that is not expressly delegated to the federal government is reserved to the states. This illustrates the condition upon which Massachusetts had delegated powers to the proposed federal government. If the federal government violated this condition, then the people of Massachusetts were obviously free to judge for themselves what to do about it. Okay, so what are the implications? When it came to a Bill of Rights, members of the Massachusetts Convention argued that it was unnecessary because the federal government would only be allowed to exercise those powers expressly delegated to it. There was no need to reserve freedom of the press, for example, because the federal government had no power to control the press. Next, Massachusetts also stated in her ratification instrument that the federal government would be limited, and it was upon this understanding that Massachusetts had ratified. What would happen if the federal government did attempt to exercise a power not delegated, invalidating Massachusetts' condition of ratification, was left unsaid. The advocates, however, argued that this would never happen. As a thought experiment, pick a federal power, say the power to order everyone to get an experimental vaccine or lose their job. Is that power expressly delegated to the federal government in Article 1, Section 8? And I'm not arguing against vaccines per se. I have no problem with people taking vaccines. I have been vaccinated for lots of diseases. It's not even a question of the state requiring people to get a vaccine. The question here is whether it is a delegated, enumerated federal power. And if not, what does that say about the federal government's respect for the limits the people had placed on it?